Coming up, a former Gators quarterback has a very strong opinion as to who should be Florida's starter this year. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad to have you with us as we dive into everything happening around the SEC here today, and I believe this is going to be a fun one.
Listen, anytime you get to bring up Doug Johnson talking about the starting quarterbacks and Kyle Trask down in Florida, I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, let me dive right into that because this is pretty provocative stuff from the former Florida quarterback here. It's item number one on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And don't worry, we'll get to all the other SEC teams here in a moment. But let me start with Florida here because Doug Johnson goes on the Florida podcast from SEC Country to sort of talk about the Gators with Jeff Cardozo and Zach Albalverdi, and they're asking about the quarterback situation. And, you know, Johnson, who knows that position well, knows that program well, understands how much Gators fans want to see quality quarterback play. But when Johnson evaluates what he saw from the Florida quarterbacks this spring, he comes away with a pretty clear takeaway. And the way that Doug describes this, it makes it fairly difficult to dispute. Here is Doug Johnson weighing in on the situation between Felipe Franks, the incumbent starter, and Kyle Trask, the guy who seems to be competing here, nipping at the heels of Franks. Here is Doug Johnson on that subject.
My humble opinion is if you have a guy that played all year or played majority of the snaps in a situation or in a competitive situation in the following spring with other guys that never saw the field, so the experience factor is working against them, and you take those guys and compare it to the guy who played majority of the snaps, and you don't have a clear-cut winner, that tells me that it's 100% open competition, number one. And number two, I would not be surprised if Trask gets the nod.
So there are two thoughts for me on this. Thought number one is the way that Johnson lays that out, as I said before, it's a little bit hard to argue with it. If you've got one guy who's got the experience, we think of experience as a little bit of a negating factor, the kind of thing that sort of, if all things being equal, the guy with experience ought to play better. If the experience isn't used in this case to be better, then maybe Felipe Franks just isn't better than Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it comes down to. And if that's all we knew about this situation, Mike, for me, that argument would win the day, except for this. Florida went through this same thing last year where they said, we're tired of Luke Del Rio. We want Felipe Franks.
Yeah.
And then before Del Rio got hurt, they're rushing him back out on the field because he really was the best guy after all. So I want to lean in the direction of Doug Johnson and say he's right about the Florida quarterback situation. But another former Gators quarterback could have said the same thing a year ago about Franks replacing Luke Del Rio because Florida fans were tired of him this time last year. What do you think?
I think that this argument would have come up more last year had Kyle Trask not been hurt, right? He gets the foot injury, some kind of heel injury right before the season, so he's not going to play most of the year anyways, right? He's not going to play. He's hurt. He's on the sideline. His name would have been brought up more often to me last year had he been able to play. I think you'd have seen a guy like Kyle Trask getting an opportunity to get on the field. I tend to agree with Doug Johnson in a way where I look at it and say, you know what? This isn't even close to being the same offensive system. Think of all the weapons that are now back that you did not have on offense last year. You didn't have an number one wide receiver. Your offensive line wasn't very good. Jordan Scarlett was not in the backfield. Now all of a sudden you're given all these new weapons. Why can't Kyle Trask do well in this role? Why can't Kyle Trask come in and you say, well, he wasn't a starter in high school. You know, he's never been a starter. He can make all the throws. And I saw the arm strength out of him. I saw him commanding the huddle in that spring game. So I still lean and say, to me, it's an even competition. Felipe Franks has passed, and last year does nothing for me, if not just make things negative.
If Kyle Trask was good enough to play, he'd be playing somewhere. I mean, he just would.
It'll be in Florida, though. I think it's – I'm telling you, I know that you sleep on Kyle Trask, but I'm just telling you, I don't look at him and say, boy, if they have to stop Kyle Trask, it's going to be a long year. Guy's got a lot of arm strength. He's got a little bit of mobility. He can move around the pocket, and I think that he played well.
But you're saying that I'm sleeping on Kyle Trask. What I actually think is everybody else in the universe is doing the exact opposite. They assume because he puts that orange helmet on, all of a sudden he's an SEC quarterback. Listen, just because you're in that role doesn't mean you are that guy. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to take all the lumps from the Florida fans like Hardwired to Self-Destruction who says, you can't wait to see the look on my face when, you know, Florida goes out there and plays well behind Kyle Trask this season.
Dinking and dunking.
Yeah, listen, I'll be the first one to say everything that everybody wants to hear me say. But for now, I'm going to assume that a guy that couldn't start for his high school team shouldn't start for Florida.
Well, listen, here's how I tend to feel about this. This to me, and I love the guy to death, he was a good teammate of mine. This to me is a Greg McElroy situation. Greg McElroy started 1 year in high school. He was behind Chase Daniels for 3 years at South Lake Carroll. Nobody really knew what to think of him. He was supposed to go to Texas Tech. He ends up at Alabama, starts 2 years for Alabama, wins a ton of games. Now, was Greg McElroy's ceiling through the roof? Was his athletic ability off the charts? Absolutely not. But given all the right pieces put around him, he won a lot of football games. I see Kyle Trask in a lot of that same role.
Morgan Recton also on YouTube says, I think Trask actually can be a decent quarterback. I just don't think Franks and Jones, he says, I don't trust Franks. Jones isn't a bust. He just needs some time to grow. So he's saying if I'm concerned about the incoming freshman Jones, if I've seen enough of Franks, why not lean in the direction of Kyle Trask? And you know what? Morgan Recton, Doug Johnson kind of agrees with you. Take a listen.
If I'm the coach and I don't see a clear winner, and I didn't see a clear winner, and I would probably lean towards Trask because of the fact that he processes the field better. I'm going to give that guy the nod because if you've played the entire year before and you can at least take that experience and look the part going into spring, just the dynamic of how you carry yourself, if it doesn't just speak volumes as I'm the guy. And I didn't see that with Felipe. So with that being said, what's the upside of Trask? At worst case, it's a dead even heat with a guy who hasn't even really gained the game experience that the guy he's competing against has. So what's he going to do when he gains that game experience?
Cliff Nelson on YouTube with one of his best comments in a while. He says, I'm not just sleeping on Kyle Trask, I'm snoring on Kyle Trask, which is a great line from Cliff Nelson. But how about what you just heard from Doug Johnson there? And I'm assuming that Johnson doesn't say these words without some careful consideration here. You know, Florida quarterbacks are pretty tight-knit fraternity, I would assume. And Johnson, his evaluation of the situation is not so much a praise of Trask, although he does do some of that. It sounds like he's just sick and tired of Felipe Franks. Right. I mean, I hate to put words in his mouth, but it sounds like he's saying that what he saw from Franks this spring was not what you want to see, the kind of, athletic swagger that you're looking to see from the starting quarterback from Florida. I mean, how else do you take Johnson's words other than that?
Well, I think that he's looking at it and saying, listen, if this guy did play last year and talking about Felipe Franks, this guy played all last year and had all these starts last year, and still it's a dead heat what Kyle Trask is doing and he's never seen the field, then how can you not think that Trask has more growth in front of him? I think that's pretty obvious with the words he's putting out there, and I agree with you. It does sound like it's like, I don't really want any more Felipe Franks, but I definitely don't think they want to go through another year like they did last year where Felipe Franks and Malik Zaire and then Luke Del Rio. I think you stick Kyle Trask in there to me. He does have a lot of potential in the upward direction, and let those things kind of play out.
By the way, Malachi Morgan over on Facebook telling Cliff Nelson on YouTube that he actually misses Cliff on the Facebook side of things, telling everybody to kick rocks. That it was one of Cliff's catchphrases that he used in the Facebook comment section for a long time. But we've had some people that have kind of migrated from Facebook over to YouTube, and we'll check it on the Twitter here at some point in time as well. We haven't done enough of that lately. Let me get a couple more comments on Facebook before we change this subject, though. Michael Nix, who's got a Georgia helmet as his Facebook profile pic, says, please start Kyle Trask, Florida. I'm 100% ready to see Florida fail. Hashtag Gator Hater, hashtag Go Dogs. Pretty funny there from Michael Nix on that. Stephen Early also says Frank simply hasn't improved enough. He didn't get better throughout the last year. He was pretty flat, random moments of great playing, but he wasn't reliable. And I think that's part of what Doug Johnson's talking about there. A guy that, he'll make the big long throw against Tennessee, but what else did he do?
Yeah, no, and when it comes to that kind of thing, I do err on the side of Felipe Franks. When you say, Doug Johnson says, well, just not scanning the field like Kyle Trask might be able to, or he didn't really go through his progressions last year. Felipe Franks didn't have a lot of opportunity to do that last year, right? I mean, he's rolling out of the pocket. Even, at the end of the game against Tennessee, he's rolling out of the pocket. He even went up in the end zone. It's just, there was nothing good about that offense. And honestly, there hasn't been much good about that offense for the last 9 years. So I think that you have to, look at it and say, Felipe might have a lot of upside. I just personally, watching it right now, I'm not sure that Kyle Trask doesn't have more.
Arthur Agee on Facebook says, Doug Johnson, why don't you go help? all you with all that talk, why don't you go help out? I don't know that Doug Johnson's being sort of deputized as a coach here, or even a volunteer assistant. But Arthur's saying, hey, if you're going to criticize somebody, I bet get out there and show them some coaching.
No, listen, where's Tebow and Steve Spurrier and Danny Warfel? And let's get everybody in the mix down there to Gainesville and help these quarterbacks get situated.
Bradley Bush, final comment on this subject. Then we're going to talk about LSU here for a moment. He says, what about Emory Jones? What happened with him? I thought he was supposed to be better than Justin Fields. And, put the comparison to Fields aside here, it is kind of funny because in this interview with Doug Johnson, they asked him about Emory Jones after they asked him about, Franks and Trask. And he didn't stick on Emory Jones very much, sort of veered off to another subject. It's kind of funny. And you know what? You and I are a little bit different on this. For Florida fans, it has to be a huge disappointment that Jones is not really pushing either of these two guys.
Right. You thought you'd see more, and I still do think. I mean, listen, we're in the middle of May. I'm not going to close the chapter on Emory Jones right now. I think there's always the opportunity for him to really get better as a passer throughout the summer, go into fall camp, and carve out some kind of role, right? But I think when you're talking about Kyle Trask and you're talking about Felipe Franks and Emory Jones just kind of sitting in the background, I think if you can let him marinate for a while, you do it. I think that's what Dan Mullen's all about. I think that and we talked about this yesterday with Joyner from South Carolina. Sometimes it does take 2 springs. This kid's supposed to be a senior in high school right now, graduating. So give this guy some time, let him in and get some reps. I don't think anybody expected him to be the day one starter at Florida, although some people did. Give him some time to kind of get used to this college atmosphere.
Let's do item number 2 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And this is actually kind of a continuation of the first topic in that Florida was one of the teams that was initially thought to maybe be in the mix for Ohio State graduate transfer Joe Burrow. As it stands right now, though, Florida not really in the mix here. LSU was expected to have hosted Burrow this past weekend, and according to some pretty interesting reporting from Alex Hickey at SEC Country, LSU one of just 2 teams in the mix here. Hickey reports that according to multiple sources, LSU and Cincinnati remain the only schools that Burrow plans to visit. Are you surprised that the visit plan for Burrow is not a little bit more filled out than that? What I think of as mid-major Cincinnati program and the big boy from the SEC, LSU. Yeah. Are you surprised these are the only 2 choices?
Yeah, I'm surprised that more people aren't willing to muddy the water, quote unquote. I guess it was either Dan Mullen or Scott Frost that used terminology like that. Hey, I don't want to muddy the water. I've already got a quarterback competition going on because, like I said, his dad and his brothers played at Nebraska. His dad now coaches at Ohio. You don't see him even looking at Ohio as a possible destination. And you did think Florida would be on the docket. But I'm going to pull a page out of the Brandon Adams playbook right now, and I'm going to go and say, you know what? Maybe this is Dan Mullen saying he's comfortable with what he's got. Maybe this is Dan Mullen looking at his quarterback situation and saying, you know what? We can win with the guys in this room. And maybe this is Dan Mullen having a conversation with Urban Meyer that's Urban saying, you know what? He doesn't possess anything you don't already have on campus.
Yeah, that may be true. I want to get to the LSU side of this in a moment because that's obviously who Alex Hickey was reporting for there when he mentioned LSU and Cincinnati competing for Burrow. But to sort of follow up on what you just said about what Florida may be feeling here and why, if Hickey's reporting is correct, that Florida is not one of the visit spots for Burrow, as Zach Alberti mentioned on his podcast not too long ago, that if Burrow does get in the mix for Florida, then the transfer wheels are probably going to be spinning at Florida, and in particular, at least for Felipe Franks. Here is Zach Alberti on that subject.
People talk about what this could do to Florida's quarterback situation now and where it's set up with the possibility of Emory starting at potentially or playing as a true freshman and just coming along until he's ready to take that job from Felipe Franks or Kyle Trask. A lot of Gator fans just have wanted to see that come to fruition and that play out. You add Joe Burrow in with 2 years of eligibility. Well, if Joe Burrow comes here and he wins the job and he stays for 2 years, what's Felipe Franks doing?
See you.
See you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. And in this case, I think the second year of eligibility there is actually almost a hindrance to Florida taking him. If he had 1 year of eligibility, I think that Florida probably does. I'm obviously speculating here, but I think it's a little bit more enticing for Florida to bring him in. I don't think they care what Felipe Franks does, that they bring him in. He sort of keeps that position warm for a year. By year 2 in the Dan Mullen era, you hope that Emory Jones is ready to go. But I don't think it's Felipe Franks they're worried about transferring here. If they're not entertaining Joe Burrow, it's Emory Jones they're worried about transferring. And maybe that does, to your point, speak of how highly they still feel about Jones. They don't want to, risk him being irritated by the fact that you've got a 2 year, blockade in front of him at that quarterback position. But to me, Florida's apparent lack of interest in Joe Burrow is more about Emory Jones than it is Felipe Franks.
I completely agree. It goes back to what Doug Johnson just said. Listen, if you think Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask are on the same plane after Felipe Franks started most of the year last year, then you're not worried about Felipe Franks leaving. I hate to say that, but you're probably not. And we asked questions all offseason about whether or not Felipe Franks actually fits what Dan Mullen is trying to do. And it is interesting, too, to think of it that way in terms of 1 year versus 2 year grad transfers, because Dan Mullen came out and said, listen, the first thing we do is we say, is this a 2 year guy? Is this a 1 year guy? And at the time, I thought, well, this is a 2 year guy. So what are you talking about? What are you knocking on him for? This is a guy who's going to be in your program 2 years. It's not a Band-Aid. Maybe he would have been more willing to look at a Band-Aid. Maybe getting a guy that's been inside that system, do you stop over for a 6-month period there in Gainesville and lead that team for 6 months, and then you get back to the Trask and Felipe Franks or the Emory Jones? Maybe that was more something he was looking for.
Bo Molinari says it doesn't say much about Joe Burrow that he's not good enough for Ohio State. The truth is Ohio State's loaded at the quarterback position.
Yeah.
I mean, Ohio State has recruited that big time, and if anything, Bo Molinari, who's a Texas A&M fan, should know that because they flipped Tate Martell from A&M, didn't they?
Yeah,
Martell
was.
Flipped from A&M to Ohio State. That gives you an idea of the kind of quarterback recruiting they've been doing.
Here's what I think is interesting, though. I mean, the Florida fans don't really seem that interested in getting him on campus. Nebraska's not recruiting him, right? We got some LSU fans in the comment section. Cliff Nelson's leading it. Boy, I hope he picks Cincinnati.
Cliff, you do not.
I find that so interesting because to me, To me, there's no way this guy picks Cincinnati over LSU. Because, I think who brought that up? Maybe Katie in the comment section saying, you know what, Luke Fickell is promising him a starting job. And maybe that's true. But I have to think that LSU fans at least want him on campus, right?
Yeah,
right,
a promised starting job for a coach he already has a relationship with would certainly be a potential push to Cincinnati because, you think the goal is to be, in the NFL one day, and, playing time in Cincinnati gives you a chance to do that even if you're not, having some of the kind of, sort of ancillary benefits that being a player at LSU might provide you. You get a chance to be on the field and be showcased there. One of our SEC country reporters, though, and I don't remember if this is Nick Suss or Alex Hickey, I apologize, mentioned kind of an interesting point that Burrow's dad is actually defensive coordinator at Ohio University.
Yeah, right.
Cincinnati plays Ohio University this year, so if he were to choose Cincinnati, he'd be going against his dad as a defensive coordinator, which is a pretty weird scenario. That's just a strange scenario. So that may be another reason why he'd ultimately choose LSU. But I'm not buying for a minute these LSU fans are. I don't want any part of Joe Burrow. Well, LSU's taken 9,000 transfers so far for the 2018 season. All of a sudden, we're going to draw the line at quarterback being a bridge too far here? Mike, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, listen, and Cliff Nelson responds, he says, BA has no familiarity with our offense, and he will have to learn it and will fracture the quarterback. But Tyler Mann claps back and says, why not bring in another quarterback to make the other quarterbacks work hard? That's kind of where I sit on it, right? If you're going to have all these other quarterbacks and there's a 3-wide competition, let's muddy the waters a little bit more. Maybe this guy's better than all 3 of them.
Cliff Nelson, I love you to death, buddy, but when you say that he has no familiarity with the LSU offense, your offensive coordinator hasn't been a play caller since Bill Clinton was in office. Nobody's got any familiarity with your offense. The last time that Steve Ensminger was calling plays, you had like the tearaway jersey.
Yeah. Offenses have changed. But that's a tough thing for me, I guess, and maybe that makes me side with Cliff a little bit more, where there's not some kind of prototypical, boy, you fit in this, you fit in that. We don't know who fits in Ensminger's scheme, so do you want to bring another guy? I don't know. I think it's interesting to look at the LSU fans' comments in the comment section and wonder who really wants this guy on campus and who doesn't. I don't think there's really a downside. You mentioned fracturing the quarterback room. Listen, at a point, if he's better than all 3 of the other guys, then you're not worried about fracturing the room, right? You're worried about being better on the football field, in my opinion.
Look, those LSU guys, you get 3 guys, they all had their chance. Listen, Ed Orgeron told us, and I was doubting him when he said it. He said, I've been trying to tell y'all all spring that one day one of these guys is good, the next day the next guy is good, but nobody's good 2 days in a row. That's a paraphrase of essentially what he said. These guys had a whole spring and plenty of scrimmages, and Orgeron was very, very explicit about who was playing well and who wasn't. They had their chance to distinguish themselves, and none of them did it.
Yeah, no, and I think, I honestly, here's another way I'm kind of looking at this too. For LSU fans, does it scare you a little bit that Florida's not recruiting this guy? Right? Because that's kind of the take I have on it. Boy, Florida, if anybody, should have the inside track on this guy. Another program that has really struggled with their quarterbacks. And the fact that Florida's not recruiting him, does Dan Mullen maybe have some kind of inside information that says, you know what, we don't want the guy down?
Well, okay, that's good speculation. I'll also speculate. Maybe Florida also knows. This is his chance that they know that he's he definitely wants to go to one of these two schools. Definitely wants to go to Cincinnati because of the relationship he has with Fickle, or maybe it's LSU, although I guess if it's already in the bag, it's more likely to be Cincinnati than LSU, and therefore Florida does not. It's sort of like the coach who takes his name out of consideration for the coaching position. Maybe Florida's not jumping here because they know there's nothing to leap onto.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you, and that makes me a little bit hesitant for LSU fans, but I got to admit, man, I'm not an LSU guy. And maybe I'll be eating my words when Bama travels down to Baton Rouge, but I'm just telling you, I'm kind of rooting for this guy to land at LSU. And I understand a lot of LSU fans think they have their quarterback. But I think this kid is pretty good, and I think that he would get his shot to be the starter at LSU, and I think that it would be a good thing for that football team if he landed there.
All right, item number 3 in our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. So a national radio host that some of y'all don't like had said something about some of your favorite players that maybe if you don't change your opinion of this guy, you'll at least like what he had to say here. Colin Cowherd was talking about the most likely players into the NFL this year to win Rookie of the Year, and a couple of SEC names got mentions from him as most likely and second most likely to win the award, despite the fact that according to the betting odds, they're not listed among the top favorites. The first here is former Georgia running back Nick Chubb, who Colin thinks is more likely than any rookie to bring home the award here in 2018. Here is Colin Cowherd to explain why.
I think Nick Chubb's going to be the Rookie of the Year in the NFL, not Baker Mayfield. First of all, he's the second most rushing yards in SEC history. That's really impressive. I think he's hard to bring down. You can hand the ball to him a ton. I think he's got a burst, so he's going to be a dynamic player. And between Tyrod Taylor and Baker Mayfield, this is not an offense that wants the quarterback throwing 38 times a game. I think Nick Chubb will spearhead this offense. I don't think it's going to be a quarterback-driven offense. I think it's going to be a running-driven offense. I think Nick Chubb is my favorite out of Georgia. First title game appearance since 1980 is my leader for Rookie of the Year.
So forget the fact that Saquon Barkley's the favorite, also a running back who plays for our buddy Michael's New York Giants. Michael's one of our producers, a big Giants fan. Forget him here for a moment. Let's look at other SEC names. We played audio yesterday of Darius Guice. How do you think Geis responds to that? You know, hearing a guy like Chubb being mentioned before him by a national guy in terms of winning Rookie of the Year. Or Sony Michel, who's obviously great friends with Nick Chubb, but was drafted in the first round, Chubb taken in the second. How do you think these other SEC running backs respond to Chubb, who at one point in time sort of ranked ahead of these folks in people's minds and then kind of got dropped back on the back burner a little bit, now maybe kind of climbing back toward the forefront again as a central figure in the Cleveland offense? What do you think these other SEC running backs think about Nick Chubb getting that kind of talk?
Well, I think, you know, if I'm being honest here, I think there's definitely that type of thing going on, right? And you're listening to kind of the whispers, and you have some time, so you're reading web pages, you know what the news articles out there are, but I think once these guys get into practice, the only thing they're going to worry about is actually being the starter on their own football team for now. And that's just the nature of the beast. I know that some of these guys are first-round draft picks and second-round draft picks and so on and so forth. But there's some grown men, they're going to also be running the ball in that backfield that don't like those guys that got in there. So first and foremost, they're going to have their nose in the grindstone and say, boy, I've got to fit in with this football team that I'm on. After that, though, I do think there is the chance you get into week 1, week 2, and all of a sudden the guys you were drafted around that you maybe trained with, maybe you played in the Senior Bowl with them, maybe you played against them in college, you do start looking around at some of the things that are going on in the NFL. And if you are a Darius Guice who felt like you got disrespected in the draft, I do think that makes you look at it and say, boy, I've really got to get going in this position that I'm in.
So if Chubb does better than Geis, or if Geis does better than Chubb, does that say anything with the college programs? I mean, obviously the fans are going to brag about it, but does it speak to LSU either preparing Geis better for the NFL or Georgia preparing Chubb better for the NFL? If Chubb's Rookie of the Year and Geis is not, now obviously in this case you got 2 Georgia running backs in the conversation here, so that's a little bit different. But if one of these schools produces the Rookie of the Year, the other one doesn't, I mean, what does that say about those schools?
I'm kind of skewed on that because I look at it and, you know, people, when Andre Smith wasn't very good and Terrence Cody kind of came out of the league and you had a Trent Richardson thing at Bama, my thought on it was, well, I think this makes Bama look better, you know, because they were able to actually get the most out of these guys, right? They were able to get as much as you could possibly get out of the recruits they were bringing in. And what these guys did afterwards in the NFL doesn't really tend to matter as much as you think it does.
On Facebook, Mike Adams says, sadly, I think Chubb's style puts him in danger of being hurt again. Geis' durability and running angry, motivated, puts Geis in the mix. I'm not going to say a bad thing about Darius Geis here, but on the Nick Chubb thing, and y'all can obviously say that, you know, I'm biased on this, maybe I am, but I've always felt like that Nick Chubb in this NFL conversation has been grossly underrated by people like Mike Adams, who maybe think that the only thing that Chubb's capable of doing is sort of taking the beating, taking the wear and tear pounding, and kind of running between the tackles.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of different stuff from Chubb over the course of his 4 years at Georgia. He was just used differently in the 2 years under Kirby Smart. Even in comparison to Sony Michel, I think that Nick Chubb's actually an underrated running back here, and one of my hills that I've chosen to die on this spring is that Chubb is an underrated back. It was kind of cool to hear Colin Cowherd sort of echoing some of the things that I've said. I have no idea who's going to win NFL Rookie of the Year. I don't pay that much attention to that kind of stuff. But in terms of Chubb being better than some people think, better than Geis, maybe better than Sony Michel, maybe even better than Saquon Barkley, would not surprise me if that actually turned out to be true.
And I think it's interesting to look at really that angle too, because I was watching a show yesterday and it was revisiting, I think, the 2015 draft, right? And they were regrading because really you need 3 years, right? You need 3 years where you can go back and look at a 3-year span and say who had a good draft. Everybody that really was asking questions about Todd Gurley, guess what? The Rams moved way up in their grading in that draft because they took the chance on Todd Gurley, and guess what? You'd give your left arm to have Todd Gurley back in that draft, knowing what he's done in the NFL. So I understand the questions. I just don't know if you can make a broad statement about those guys that have had injury problems and how they're going to do in the NFL.
Will Scott says Chubb had one injury 2 years ago. He says you guys don't know what you're talking about if you're going to describe Nick Chubb as being injury prone, which I think is interesting from Will Scott. But let me let you hear a little bit more from Colin Cowherd here, who also praised another incoming NFL rookie from the SEC, this time Alabama wide receiver Calvin Ridley. Here is Colin on Ridley.
The other one is Calvin Ridley, the wide receiver for Atlanta. He will face no double teams because Julio Jones is on the other side. He's second in Alabama history in receptions and touchdown receptions. The other thing is, this is an offense with a lot of weapons in Atlanta, with a Pro Bowl level quarterback in Matt Ryan, which virtually guarantees production. So this kid is guaranteed 60 catches and 6 touchdowns simply because this offense has 2 good backs. They've got Mohamed Sanu and Julio Jones. He's going to get a ton of looks in that slot. I think Calvin Ridley's my number 2 favorite to win Rookie of the Year.
So Colin Cowherd says Calvin Ridley's guaranteed 60 catches, 6 touchdowns. For Alabama in 2017, he has 63 catches and 5 touchdowns. If he goes out there and lights the world on fire for the Atlanta Falcons, now all's well that ends well for Alabama. Obviously, they're the reigning national champions. But if he goes out there and lights the world on fire for Atlanta, you got to ask, what in the world was the Crimson Tide doing for a year not using a guy like Calvin Ridley effectively? Now, he ends up, being a first-round pick. He's going to make his money. But, you saddled this guy for a couple years, the quarterback that can't deliver him the football, and he's going to go to Alabama. I should say he's going to go to Atlanta. He's going to be compiling stats here left and right. And you got to say, to Nick Saban, how about you take care of your wide receivers here a little bit and not let them, solely rely on the combine for a means of getting into the first round.
And Nick's gotten those questions before. And I think that, listen, it's the conversation was about O.J. Howard for a couple of years. The conversation was about Julio Jones like that when I was in school. And the only answer you can give to it is that's just not the Alabama model. It really isn't. I mean, Amari Cooper had an incredible career at Alabama, and he set a lot of records. And that's what the offense was with Blake Sims and Lane Kiffin. It was this light-up style, over-the-top play-action offense. But you can't argue what the results have been. And I'm sure that Nick Saban would echo the same sentiment. If you have to look at it and say, you know what, Calvin, you're only going to get 20 catches this year, but you're going to win a national title, I'm sure Calvin would be okay with that.
Yeah, but you got a different scenario at Alabama right now where you've got, Devontae Smith, former elite recruit. You've got Henry Ruggs, former elite recruit. You've got Jerry Jeudy, former elite recruit. Now, my assumption is with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, Alabama's going to use those guys a lot more. But if they don't, if it's more of, Najee Harris getting 1 million carries a game, at some point in time, if you're a 5-star wide receiver, when are you going to stop going to Alabama?
Well, listen, I agree with you, but it hasn't been a question until now. I mean, it hasn't hurt any of these wide receivers from coming to Alabama. You had Julio Jones, who, listen, for all the yards that he didn't get, still got drafted, 6th, 7th overall. The Falcons still gave up half of their draft load to go get the guy. Same thing can be said about Amari Cooper. His numbers were good for 1 year. Same thing can be said about O.J. Howard. I mean, he disappeared for times, and he's still a first-round draft pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I understand what you're saying. How can they continue to sell this? But I think that if you talk to any of those rookie wide receivers from last year, they'd say, you know what, I'm fine with it as long as we keep winning the ring. I really do think that they're okay with that. Now, wide receiver position is a different beast, so you're going to run into kids that don't like that. But I think in terms of being able to win a ring and be at a program like that and be a first-round draft pick, I think all's well that ends well.
On Facebook, Trey Dukes says, I disagree with that. It did cost Calvin Ridley some money. Maybe Trey's saying you go higher in the first round, which is obviously more money there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, but I would answer that with he cost himself some money at the combine. His 40 time wasn't as good as you wanted it to be. His 3-and-code drill wasn't as good as you wanted it to be. He's known for being a great route runner. That's what kept him in the first round. You see some of his drills, the straightaway speed's not there. I don't think that's what he got drafted for.
Right,
but I understand. I don't want to just act like I'm dusting that off. I understand what you're saying.
I mean, it's like the old line, and you have to. This is a date. I'm going to date myself by saying this, but Dean Smith was the former legendary North Carolina basketball coach, and the question was, who's the only coach to ever hold Michael Jordan under 30 points? It was Dean Smith. They coach him at North Carolina. Some of these wide receivers, the only coach in the world that could hold them under 100 yards a game and a couple touchdowns is the coach that actually was their head coach, Nick Saban, in some cases. And it's one thing to say, well, Calvin Ridley still made the first round, and Amari Cooper still made the first round, and kind of on you go. But what about the guys that didn't? What could they have done in a system that was going to utilize them more?
No, and I think I think that is the hope of a lot of Alabama people, that you do see that come to the forefront this next year, because everybody that was an Alabama fan last year, whether you like Jalen Hurts or don't like Jalen Hurts, you knew the offense was limited, right? You didn't go in thinking 3 receivers were going to go for 100 yards. That's just not what it's based around. And I think that is the hope when you look at Tua and say, boy, I love all the things that Jalen Hurts did well. I think when you look at Tua, you say, boy, it would be nice to get those wide receivers fed. Mm-hmm. I think that's the way a lot of Alabama fans do feel.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Let's do that on number 4 here on our SEC Country Line 1st and 10 list. And I think this is a big bragging point for Tennessee here, and I think there is some there's some reasons why this matters. Wanye Morris was a part of the Grayson 4, who we brought coverage for you the other day right here on SEC Country Live. You see him there on your screen choosing the Tennessee Vols, and shortly after choosing Tennessee, Wanye Morris was given the coveted 5th star as a 24/7 Sports composite ranking here, a 5-star offensive lineman now in the mix for Tennessee. And sometimes those designations, to people that don't follow recruiting all that closely, you may wonder, what does all that mean? But in the case of Tennessee, having possession of this 5-star right now for a brand new coach in Jeremy Pruitt, I think this really does kind of matter, right?
I think it definitely matters. And any of y'all that were watching that show when we had that announcement, I was all over. I said, boy, this guy's going to end up with a 5th star. I mean, you just don't have that combination of lower leg power and arm length and the ability to move laterally like he's displaying right here. You don't see that. And that's just such a special combination where you have guys that are long. You have guys that might have powerful hips. You might have guys that have some of these things. And they're going to be good 4-star players. But this guy, with this combination like it is, this is a 5-star offensive tackle, and I think that's huge for Jeremy Pruitt. This is, this was a Bama or Georgia guy, right? He's getting the Bama bump right here.
Yeah.
He commits, and all of a sudden he's got the Bama bump up to the 5th star. This is a big thing for Tennessee to get this 5-star guy on campus. All of a sudden, you start looking to the future, and you feel really good about that offensive line position.
When we brought you live coverage of Morris' decision a couple of weeks ago, we actually had Blake Morgan on with us there at the time to sort of talk about the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of Morris choosing Tennessee. And in the midst of Morgan giving his opinion on this, I think he sort of touched on another reason why Morris being bumped up now to a 5-star prospect, it has even more value for the Vols. Here is Blake Morgan on that subject.
They came up short. They whiffed on a lot of these top guys. Is kind of the sentiment was, well, give Pruitt some more time. Give him some time to make these relationships count. Give him some time to connect with these guys, and he's going to be able to land them. And that's exactly what you saw today. Morris, the top 50 guy in 247 composite. ESPN last week ranked him as the number 9 or number 10 prospect in the country. So, he's a big-time guy that's going to come in and probably play immediately. The offensive line doesn't have a lot of depth and honestly is missing talent in a lot of different areas. And Wanya's going to be able to walk in and probably play pretty early on.
Jimmy Welch says, Wanya, this is on Facebook, Wanya Morris is going to go well with Trey Smith and some other guys that Tennessee's looking to add here. Obviously, we talked yesterday about the possibility that Trey Smith comes back healthy for Tennessee here in 2018. But one of the things you heard Blake Morgan say there is, if you want to go back to the end of the 2018 recruiting cycle, it was a huge embarrassment, and there's no other way around it, to lose out on a legacy player who lived in Knoxville, whose dad was a prominent businessman in that city, a donor to Tennessee. To have him choose Georgia over Tennessee is just a humiliation, and there's no other way around it. Tennessee fans will still be aggravated about that for the next 3 to 4 years. So Morris makes you feel better about that. but it's also the guys that Tennessee got close to and just couldn't quite finish with, whether it be Jacob Copeland, whether it be Quay Walker, whether it be some of those names that the Vols were in on, maybe even took the silver medal on, but you don't really get anything tangible for finishing second in these recruiting races. But as Blake Morgan said, a lot of Tennessee fans were holding out that hope that if you can just be patient for right now, this may all work out eventually when Pruitt has a chance to leverage these relationships a little bit more, and Wanya Morris is an example of that.
Yeah, and I think this also goes to what we've talked about Jeremy Pruitt a couple times, right? To where his ability to identify and recruit talent, I mean, this kind of speaks to that, right? I mean, you go in and get a 4-star guy out of Grayson right down the street from Athens, and you kind of say, boy, okay, you got this 4-star offensive tackle. It looks pretty good. And then you start taking a look at this guy like I did, and you say, man, this guy really is absolutely elite. I mean, he's going to be a very good player in the SEC. So I think it puts Tennessee fans almost, I don't want to use the word at ease, but I feel like it makes Tennessee fans realize that, hey, this is what we thought we were getting a head coach. Maybe this is coming to fruition.
Mike Adams says it definitely matters that he's a 5-star, but the proof's going to be in the pudding. Tennessee has a recent history of high-starred guys, and therefore high expectations. How'd that go for them? I guess I might dispute that accounting of the facts a little bit. Obviously, a big program like Tennessee is going to bring in a lot of highly rated recruits. I would argue, though, that what ultimately does in Butch Jones is there aren't enough of them. Yes, he had one like really highly rated class because they signed like 9,000 people, but you back in the sort of the oversigning days. But in recent years, Tennessee was sort of settling for, unfortunately, like the leftovers of the SEC table after the Alabamas and the Georgias and their rival from the ACC Clemson after they were sort of picking over all the first fruits.
Yeah, and I'm going to go one step further than that because I kind of lie more on the development side when you talk about this. Butch Jones wasn't developing anybody. I mean, look at what he did with all the stars. I mean, he had so much talent at times. And you look at a couple years ago, and I know they got hit by the injury bug, but you weren't even doing what you could have done with Alvin Kamara. You weren't even doing what you could have done with a lot of players you had on the football team. So even with the stars there, you have to have development as well. And I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt's trying to bring to the table.
Katie McCarty, who's a Georgia fan, says when Tennessee starts 2-6 this season, Sam Pittman, the Georgia offensive line coach, can always flip him. And maybe that happens. But I think that, and I say this as a Georgia fan, I talked to Jeff Sintel about this morning on Dog Nation Daily. That's the show that I do every day. Maybe there's something to be said for Georgia should have showed Wanya Morris a little more love than it did.
Yeah. Well, no, I think the scary thing here for Tennessee fans, I really don't think it's Georgia. I wonder if we're not dealing with an Owen Pappoe situation really pulling him down to Auburn. Because remember, that was what the decision was between, right? Wanya Morris picking between Auburn and between Tennessee. Can you hold on to him in the long run? I would say that Auburn might be a bigger suitor in that situation.
Speaking of this live coverage of recruits, we got a big announcement we want to make you aware of. Tomorrow, SEC Country Live is actually going to start a little early. We'll still be on until 4 p.m. the way we are every day, or 4:05 as our staff likes to remind us. We'll still be on like normal every single day, but we're going to start a little early tomorrow, around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I believe, because we're really excited to bring you live coverage of Ramil Keaton, who's a terrific wide receiver prospect from the Atlanta area, who's going to choose between 3 SEC schools tomorrow. We get a chance to bring that to you live, as Auburn, Tennessee, Ole Miss in the mix here for a big-time player here. And that's going to be a fun thing. We had a great time doing the Grayson 4 the other day, and bringing this live coverage of Ramil Keaton tomorrow is going to be a blast.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Kind of fits right in with what you guys know as SEC Country Live. Just going to be on a little bit earlier, and I think that Auburn, Ole Miss, Tennessee fans will all want to pay attention to that interview. As a good player.
And I also mentioned this a moment ago, too, that, of course, I do Dog Nation Daily every single day on the Dog Nation video channels and available as a podcast wherever you find podcasts. And on Monday, the very first ever edition of Roll Tide Daily begins with Mike Johnson. We're really excited about that one, too, my friend.
Man, I'm so excited to get cranked off with all you Alabama fans. We're going to have so many good topics. Working on a couple of guests next week, so excited to get that one cranked off, man. Hope all Alabama fans, and even if you're just looking at the Alabama program, be able to join us at 1 o'clock Eastern Time Monday.
And for what it's worth, I am not the least bit worried about Owen Pappoe pulling Wanya Morris down to Auburn. Speaking strictly as a fan here, that's the least of my concerns right now, that Pappoe might have some gravitational pull for Auburn. I'm not sure he sticks around Auburn long enough to have a whole lot of coattails.
I'm just telling you, man, I would be more concerned about that happening than I would the Wanya Morris flipping to Georgia.
And Auburn fans, I kid. That's just having a little fun there. Let's do item number 5, though, on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I guess a little bit of bad news here for Christian Kirk, the former great return man and wide receiver for the Texas A&M Aggies, on his way to the NFL with the Arizona Cardinals here. But an event from earlier in the winter now resurfacing where Kirk, I guess, was arrested and charged with some, I don't know what the official charge is, disorderly conduct, whatever, stemming back from the Waste Management Phoenix Open, a golf tournament that takes place around Super Bowl time every single year in Phoenix. And we were talking about this before the show. This is like a big weekend on my calendar. I don't go to this, but I love watching on TV because it's like the wildest scene in the world. In fact, for those of you not aware, here is the scene at the golf tournament. You see people dressed up. There's obviously a ton of drinking. More drinking probably at this event than really anywhere. I think it's the most attended sporting event in America each year. There's like 200-something thousand people over the course of the weekend who end up coming. It is a truly insane atmosphere, and I guess a little much for a Christian Kirk here, who allegedly got a little too drunk, and you see plenty of opportunities to do that on his way out. Allegedly throwing some rocks at some cars and some things like that. The Arizona Cardinals have responded here. They say, we spoke with Christian about it at length and also looked into it independently. Our understanding is that the process will be resolved in the near future. While it remains an active legal matter, we won't comment further. That's the Arizona Cardinals here on this. Sounds to me they're not that worried about this.
Yeah, I don't think they should be, right? I mean, I think this is one of those things where it's not a domestic dispute. And we talked about this yesterday, about the Florida assignee getting arrested, a little bit of a domestic dispute, kicks a car, smashes a phone, a little bit along the same lines. But Christian Kirk is a grown man, right? You're worried about making your employee look bad. You're worried about all these other things, but doesn't sound like the Cardinals are too concerned. And I guess this is one of those things where you say, hey, listen, you're a big boy. You got yourself into this mess. Now get yourself out of it, and let's get on the football field.
I got to call foul about this, though. Bo Molinari is one of our great commenters on the Facebook side usually. He pops over to YouTube every now and then. But on Facebook, usually, he's a big A&M fan. But he's also pretty critical of the Florida guys from time to time who've kind of run afoul of the law.
What'd you do, Bo?
So here's what Bo says about his guy, Christian Kirk. Now, you got to understand something. Bo is in here hammering these Florida people for getting arrested.
Oh, he told me I sugarcoated the arrest we talked about yesterday. Bo was like, oh, you sugarcoated that.
So the same guy that said Mike Johnson sugarcoating other players from other programs getting arrested says, attaboy, Christian, way to have a good time.
He says it's an alpha move. It's an alpha move.
Get out of here with that, Bo. Listen to yourself, man. To me, if you want to be serious for like 4 seconds, it's actually almost like messing with some other dude's car is not an alpha move.
It's a no-no, man.
I mean, isn't that like one of the unwritten rules of like sort of guy behavior? You don't mess with people's cars.
Listen, man, you've seen my truck. You saw my truck today.
I did. I got a chance to ride.
I'm gonna tell you right now, somebody's catching a baseball bat to the back if you mess with my truck.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be throwing rocks at people's car. What are you, a 9-year-old boy?
No good. Can't do that.
But here's the other thing, too. Last thing for me on this subject. Like, I don't really get what it is about people. Like, there was a time in my life, believe it or not, sometimes you have a hard time believing this, where I was kind of out on the weekend, having a good time, doing a lot of things like that. But I was never like the guy that turned mean before it was all said and done. I'm not the kind of guy that was going to have. I don't even know about so much that. It's just that I guess I just sort of passed out like a gentleman more so than like get rowdy and start throwing rocks at cars. I mean, are you a rowdy drunk?
No, not usually. Not usually. I mean, every now and then, I guess it depends on probably what I'm drinking. I won't go down that road with y'all and list off the things, but you have different reactions, different things. I'm usually not a rowdy drunk. Usually pretty level-headed guy, but that's how it is.
All right, let's do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed for Dan Mullen for this quote I'm about to read. He's speaking at one of these spring tour events. Mullen's done a million of these. I think he somewhat, deserves a commendation for how many of these events he's doing. What are you doing? You okay?
I'm just thinking, you wake up disappointed in Dan Mullen. It's
no,
like,
that's not true.
I'm disappointed in Dan Mullen today.
That's not true.
Blow me away. I mean,
no. I'll read the quote. You can decide for yourself, Hotshot. You do the talking on this one. So the subject comes up of playing tough non-conference games. Alabama is going to go to Notre Dame in a couple of years, a decade. Georgia's playing Notre Dame again next year. All these SEC teams doing a bunch of heavy lifting when it comes to schedules. But Mullen says Florida State, that's enough. Here's his quote via 24/7 Sports. He says, we already play one of the toughest schedules. You're talking about already having Florida State as a permanent game. I think one of the things that it does is it limits some of how you're able to schedule. Other schools say, like, boy, hey, we're going to play a big-time opponent, and they do. Well, we do that with Florida State. Oh, well, like, we already play that game. What about other big-time opponents? Well, most other people, they have the one big-time opponent. A lot of them are playing, and we already have that built into the schedule. He goes on to say that he wouldn't mind like going to play a game in Ireland or something like that. Nobody wants to see Florida go to Ireland. No. People do want to see Florida play Ohio State, play a game like Michigan, where they played a couple years ago, play Miami in your own state for goodness sakes. You can't tell me that doesn't disappoint you.
It does. It really. And I wanted to pile on you a minute ago, but I felt the same way. And listen, You guys have heard me talk about the 9-game conference schedule that I really want to lobby for, right? I really want that to be a part. Until that happens, there's room for another one of these games. And I understand what he's saying. Listen, we're backloaded with with these games. Look at South Carolina last year, though. They're backloaded with Clemson. Guess what? They go out and face NC State in the opener. It's possible to do, and especially this day and age, and I've talked about this a bunch of times. This is a playoff. You don't lose one game and get eliminated from national title contention. There is a playoff, and a committee can go in there and look at it and say, boy, you know what? They opened up with a really tough game on the road, or they opened up with a really tough game at a neutral site. It is disappointing for Dan Mullen to kind of talk about it like that, because the fact of the matter is you're always going to play Florida State. So we're never going to see Florida in any other big matchups with anybody? I guess not, if Dan Mullen has anything to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, he says we already play one of the toughest schedules in the country, but here's how it starts this year. Charleston Southern week 1, Kentucky week 2, Colorado State week 3, it's at Tennessee week 4. The only game that's going to have any consequence whatsoever in the first 4 weeks of the season is the Tennessee team that was winless in the SEC a year ago. You are at Mississippi State on week 5 to close out the month of September. At that point in time, you're kind of in business here. But those first 3 games are total embarrassments. The 4th game is not a whole lot to write home about, which is to say nothing of the fact that back in November you swing back around and play Idaho. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not good enough.
Let's give credit where credit's due. I mean, I might be speaking wrong here, but Florida does play Miami in a coming up season. I don't know if it's 19 or 20 or it's a couple of years down the road.
They haven't played them in
They haven't played them a long time. They haven't played them, but they do.
Since 2001 probably?
I think they have them on the schedule in 2020. So it's coming up.
Early 2000s.
My point is this. They wouldn't have that Miami game. That was not something Dan Mullen okayed, right? I mean, that Miami game was done before we're even talking about Dan Mullen right here. And if he puts a stop on that moving forward, then I think Florida fans are getting not as much as you bargained for, right? I mean, I just think that's the nature of the beast. I think that all fan bases want their teams to play in high-profile games. And if Dan Mullen's standing pat and saying, you know what, we're good with Idaho, and we're good with Louisiana Monroe, and we're good, then I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a good look.
Terry Crews says they should play UCF.
That's never going to happen. Listen, Alabama doesn't play UAB, vice versa. It never happens that way. Now, South Florida, I can see that happening. I can see them playing South Florida from a little bit farther down the road, but I don't think they're ever going to play UCF.
They don't want to play FAU right now.
No.
Morgan Recton also says it's 2020. He thinks that Miami's playing Florida, which is there you go. And listen, here's the one thing I'll say in fairness to Mullen. Mullen's opinion here is not unique. Most of these coaches
don't
want to play anybody.
That's the thing.
Most of these coaches don't want to play anybody. But Florida is virtually the only school in the SEC. And you're right. South Carolina plays Clemson, still plays a tough week 1 opponent. Georgia plays Georgia Tech, which is obviously not the same category of Clemson and Florida State. Right. I do get that. But Georgia's going to play plenty of non-conference September games against big-time opponents. Not doing one this year, but that's really been the outlier recently for Georgia. Florida, the one game against Michigan is the total outlier. Every other year, Florida September looks like something that, American Heritage High School will be playing.
Yeah, no, here's the thing, too. Look at the teams that aren't successful. I mean, let's look at Clemson, right? They play South Carolina, a crossover game to the SEC every year. Tough opponent. Guess what? They're going to Texas A&M to get some more. They're going to Auburn. They're trying to schedule games with Georgia. Look at Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State's got all these games going. They got Michigan, and they're playing, still Notre Dame and USC, and they played Oklahoma last year. The teams that really want to get there are trying to get there. You just have to go to those. You don't have to win all of them. You just have to get there and win the ones you need to.
Let me do item number 7 here in our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. We mentioned the possibility that LSU might add graduate transfer quarterback Joe Burrow. That's news we all await hearing on the next couple of weeks. And it kind of got Nick Suss over at SEC Country thinking about, would that mean that LSU has the most transfers in use of any team in the country for 2018 if that were to go down? He cites some reporting and some research from Adam Brittenberg at ESPN that says there's really only 2 teams right now in the country using 3 graduate transfers. In fact, let me show you some of what Nick Suss had to write here. That will LSU be more reliant on transfers than any other team in the FBS in 2018? No team boasts a wider variety of transfer talents at more disparate positions than LSU. Boy, disparate's a big-time word. Trying to adapt to a new pass-first offense, Giles is set to lead the receiver corps. In need of a defensive lineman after massive depth concerns in 2017, Braden Fehoko is penciled in as a starting defensive end in a reinvigorated group. Nick Suss goes on to say that if you're looking for an experienced cornerback after losing Dante Jackson and Kevin Tolliver to the NFL, you got Alexander here, Terrence Alexander, a longtime contributor from Stanford secondary. Add that up, and LSU should have 3 transfers producing in 3 different position groups, places where the Tigers need help. Throw Burrow into the equation, maybe, and it's not out of the question that LSU would have more transfers than anybody. So that's obviously laid out pretty nicely by Nick Suss. Adam Rittenberg, as I said, also did some reporting on this for ESPN. Is this a good thing?
I think it's a good thing for this year, right? I don't know if it says a lot of good things about Orgeron in the future. I think if you have to piece together your football team based on transfers throughout the Orgeron tenure, then it becomes a concern. But I've mentioned this before. If we're talking about roster management and you're talking about all of a sudden finding yourself with holes and all of a sudden have to deal with the aftermath of thinking you're going to get somebody and not getting somebody, then I think he's doing a good job. And I'm not going to knock him for that. I don't think that you should, really hang your hat on doing these type of things. Now, listen, Braden Fehoko might be one of the best D linemen on the team. Giles might be the best wide receiver in the wide receiver corps. Terrence Alexander might be the second best DB they have there. So these are good players they're plugging in. Joe Burrow might be the most talented quarterback on the roster once they bring him in. I'm just saying you can't live and die by the transfer market, and that's what I feel like if you've got 4 starters, that's what I feel like Orgeron's doing.
All right, I want to talk about the LSU thing here. Let me get Greg Steele's comment on the Florida topic a moment ago because this is a point you got to bring up. He says, BA, come on. He's mentioning Georgia's schedule here. Austin Peay, Middle Tennessee State, UMass, Georgia Tech. What are you trying to say? That's harder than Florida's out-of-conference schedule? You got to be kidding. Greg, you're right. Georgia does not play a tough schedule in 2018, at least by the measurement of the out-of-conference schedule, even by in-conference schedules. Yeah. Georgia plays one of the easier schedules in the SEC.
I think I'm going to back you on what you're about to say.
In the SEC this year. But Kirby Smart has made no bones about the fact that he wants to keep playing tough games. And you don't hear Kirby Smart saying, hey, we've already got a tough enough schedule. Georgia is embracing playing these kind of games. Played Notre Dame a year ago, played Notre Dame again in 2019. Got some Chick-fil-A stuff in Atlanta going on. Georgia has embraced this kind of stuff. Not unique to the SEC, but sort of in keeping with the rest of the SEC. It's really, for me, Florida that's unique and not doing enough of this kind of stuff.
No, I agree. And it's not so much, hey, what does your schedule look like this year? It just seems to me like Dan Mullen's putting a speed bump out there and saying, hey, we don't ever want to schedule. How many times have we talked about now Georgia Clemson? Boy, the whispers are out there. Georgia, what if Kirby Smart came out and said, boy, you know what? I think we've got enough going on. We don't really need that matchup.
Right.
I look at, Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M playing Clemson this year. I feel like that the ability is out there now with an 8-game conference schedule and still the ability to get to the 4-way playoff to where you can accept games like this. I don't think you have to look at it and say, we're talking about Florida here. We're talking about the Florida Gators. This is a nationally prominent program. I don't think you should turn away anybody.
Terry Crews says, Florida's got a harder schedule than Georgia. Florida has to play Georgia, so therefore theirs is harder. So I don't know what you do with that. G. Grace, though, on YouTube says, BA, when you talk with Kirby, tell him to go schedule Miami. Look, I think that Georgia's looking to play plenty of non-conference games. I don't know that it's looking to orchestrate a rematch with Mark Richt anytime soon, or a matchup with Mark Richt.
And on the same note, let's give LSU some credit, too. They're going out and playing Miami this year. They've had a number of non-conference matchups in Houston and trying to get out there. It's not so much a knock on what Florida's schedule is this year or anybody else's schedule this year. It's the fact that he's not even willing to give it a look and saying, you know what, it's tough enough as it is. I think it's kind of a cop-out.
Speaking of LSU, to go back to the topic we were discussing about the use of transfers here this year, what you laid out, I almost 100% agree with. That LSU needs to be good this year. And every single one of those players that Nick Suss just mentioned, the guys we talk about all the time, they all make LSU better. Giles is a receiver. Fehoko is a defensive lineman. Alexander is a defensive back. Burrow potentially is a quarterback. They all will or would make LSU better. But over the course of the long haul, you've got to be bringing in your own players here. And I do wonder if Orgeron's doing enough of that.
No, I agree too. And I hate to go back to the same topic, but I'm going to have your back on this right now. Somebody just asked the question, would you feel like that if Georgia Tech was good every year? And the bottom line is this. BA has gone out on a limb where nobody has gone out and said, listen, I don't even want to play Georgia Tech anymore. There's not enough value in the schedule for BA to say that they need to schedule Georgia Tech anymore. He's been all about bringing in the Clemsons and the other teams of the world to play. So you can't have that question of, boy, would he be saying that if Georgia Tech was good every year? I promise you, BA doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, the bottom line is Georgia's playing a team like Austin Peay this year. Within 5 or 10 years, no one's playing Austin Peay anymore.
No, it's not going to happen.
There's just no market.
There's a changing of the landscape that I continuously try to bring up on the show about. There is a 14 playoff, and it's going to get expanded. I don't know when it's going to get expanded, but it will be expanded. There's too much money to be had. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then what's the danger of picking up some of these non-conference games? You can make more money doing that, especially if you do a home and home.
Yeah, let me do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. This is a pretty interesting scenario involving South Carolina and a quarterback recruit that could potentially be pretty important for the Gamecocks, but he's also a guy getting a lot of interest from other places. Recently got an offer from Ohio State. Recently got an offer from LSU. Maybe South Carolina a little concerned about Ryan Helinski's future. That's the quarterback's name here. So the Gamecocks started sending out their own offers as well. usually that's a tip-off that there could be a big change coming, at least from South Carolina's perspective. Maybe that's what they thought could happen. But when Hilinski saw this, he didn't like what he saw. He tweeted, I don't like it, and then gave, the staff always likes when I explain the emoji faces, what looks to be a real look of concern emoji there with the straight mouth and the straight eyes. Then Ryan Hilinski comes back and tweets again, maybe to sort of calm some fears there, don't worry, and he gives the chicken emoji there. But clearly Hilinski bothered by the fact that some offers were extended to some other quarterbacks here. He sat down with Phil Kornblut from Sports Talk South Carolina. Phil's been covering South Carolina recruiting for a long time. Hilinski tried to explain his perspective here. After meeting with Will Muschamp, Hilinski says, he just reaffirmed what I was going through and not to worry because that's just what they are going to do in our class. I'm his guy, is what he said. He wants to build the program with me. I talked to him and had a great conversation with him. My dad talked to Brian McClendon as well. So everything was settled. Nothing to worry about anymore. I was just a little confused at the time is all. They are definitely going to let me know in the future when they decide to offer another quarterback. And he says, I'll definitely be the first to know. I'm not worried about that at all. That's Ryan Hilinski via Sports Talk South Carolina. They're talking about this situation here. What do you make of all this? A quarterback that some think could have eyes for Ohio State, maybe even another program. South Carolina maybe playing a little defense here but making some other offers, and some folks start getting their feelings hurt.
No, yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is, right? You get your feelings hurt because, well, Muschamp said, boy, you're going to be the cornerstone of this class. You know, you're a highly ranked, high four-star quarterback out of California. You're the go-to guy, right? And then all of a sudden you start offering other quarterback, and I guess the communication wasn't there for Ryan Hilinski, not the way he wanted it to be. Hey, if I'm the cornerstone of this class, if I'm the guy that's going to be, the name in bright lights when you're bringing this class down, why aren't you telling me what you're doing, and why are you offering other quarterbacks behind my back? It's not how I would go through the process, but I understand what Hilinski's doing because it's just a different day and age. We're talking about guys that are transferring now because of a guy in a class ahead of them or a guy in a class behind them is starting for that tenure. Imagine them signing a guy in the same class, and Bama's going to sign 2 quarterbacks this year. Imagine them signing a guy in the same class and then them saying, hey, you're our guy. By the way, we're bringing in another quarterback as well. So I wouldn't go about it that way, but I understand what he's saying.
Hale McGranahan from SEC Country actually reported something kind of interesting on this, that every time Hilinski would tweet out, hey, blessed to receive an offer from Ohio State or a school like that, he said that he always contacted South Carolina before he did that, but the Gamecocks didn't do him the same favor when they sort of sent out these other offers. But if you're South Carolina, you're in a tough spot here. Obviously, you want Hilinski. You want Hilinski more than any quarterback you could get. But he's been a fast riser. He was a 3-star recruit like 2 weeks ago, and now he's like one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the country, at least according to the recruiting rankings, in a year where there probably isn't a true 5-star quarterback out there. I mean, South Carolina sees the writing on the wall. Once a school like Ohio State starts offering you, especially when you got Hilinski bragging about this to everybody reportedly, it just seems unlikely that South Carolina keeps him, and that's one of the reasons why they want to have some other options in the coffers.
It's so tough in this day and age in quarterback recruiting. I mean, how many times did we see it last year? Think about a guy like Emory Jones. Think about a guy like Justin Fields. Think about some of these other guys that, listen, you want to get these guys, but you've got to have that security policy behind you, right? You've got to have insurance. If you're a place like South Carolina, Jake Bentley's not going to last forever. De'Kerrion Joyner doesn't seem to be panning out in that spot. Michael Skarnecki is going to be leaving the program. You've got to have guys that can come in and play quarterback, and you need that insurance policy in case Hilinski says, listen, I'm looking around. Well, you know what? If you're looking around, then so am I. Yeah. So I understand where they're coming from.
Item number 9, SEC Country Live, our first and 10 list. I thought that Brian Stoltz the other day had a pretty good synopsis of what's going on in Arkansas right now. Hunter Yurachek, the Arkansas AD, had gone on the Bo Mattingly radio show. Bo's been a guy that's done a good radio show there in Arkansas for a long time. And I guess, let me find the quote from Yurachek here in terms of what he says about the decision coming about whether or not they're going to play more games at Little Rock or not. Yurachek tells Bo Mattingly, I think you'll see a decision from the Board of Trustees regarding the future of games at War Memorial Stadium sometime within the next month. So we could really be just a couple of weeks away from hearing this. But what Brian Stoltz explains here is, one of the hang-ups here is that you've got boosters connected to the Arkansas program who also live in Little Rock who threaten to withhold some money if these games don't remain. It's like 1 game a year that we're talking about.
That's crazy.
If these games don't remain in Little Rock. And I got to tell you, I'm not an Arkansas fan. We have a lot of Arkansas fans who watch us right now. They may disagree with me. But I think this behavior on the part of these boosters is a real shame because while it may be good for them to have a game close to their hometown of Little Rock, it is not good for the University of Arkansas. On-campus visits is what sells recruits. and you can't sell people on War Memorial Stadium in Little Rock. Reynolds Razorback Stadium in Fayetteville is a great stadium. It's an awesome atmosphere for college football. The fact that Arkansas would willingly choose to not play a game there every single year is shooting itself in the big toe when it comes to recruiting, and it's a shame that boosters are holding them over the barrel over this. If that is indeed the case, I thought that Brian Stoltz did a good job of explaining this.
Yeah, and Brian Van Dusen, I hope I'm saying that right on Facebook, he starts chiming in. He says, I get the history, but just end the debate and be done with it. But honestly, I've never been to a game in War Memorial, and I live 30 minutes away. I've been to Fayetteville games, and from a fan standpoint, it was a dream come true. And that's kind of where I would stand on the issue. And I think, listen, it's different for every fan base. And I've listened to Bama fans that say they went up to Legion Field at Birmingham, and boy, it was incredible. But I have to feel like that's most of Arkansas fans, right? It's different being in Fayetteville than it is in Little Rock. And for that reason, it does stink that they would hold that over their head.
Well, what bothers me is Brian Van Dusen, the quote you just read, that's clearly a fan who's got Arkansas's best interest in mind, as opposed to a booster that has his own best interest in mind or some sort of Little Rock business interest in mind. Brian here is being more selfless than the people who are actually funding all of this, which if you're an Arkansas fan, I think drives you crazy.
No, I think it does too. And you never want... When you're in a place like Arkansas right now, and you have a guy like Chad Morris who's a brand new head coach, and you're trying to turn the leaf, you don't want to have obligations. You really don't. You don't want to be obligated to anything. You want to be able to change that culture and mold it to however you see fit. I just can't tell you enough that if Chad Morris isn't allowed to do the things he wants to do and allowed to mold that program the way he thinks it should be, then he's never going to have a chance to be successful there.
Lincoln Nail on Facebook says, it is a shame. War Memorial Stadium is a horrible stadium that even the players don't like. Yeah, I think that is a shame. I mean, Arkansas needs recruits. It needs good incoming players in the future, and the way you get those is by bringing them to Fayetteville on a pretty fall Saturday and showing them what a great place that place can be. That's how you will win with this kind of stuff here. Although Cliff Nelson does remind us that money talks and BS walks. That's always the rule. And if the money guys want these games in Little Rock, they're going to get their way, even if it's better for Arkansas, the alternative.
I mean, can we not get Jerry Jones in there to say, boy, you know what? Let's not do Little Rock. Y'all just come to Dallas every year. Can we not do that? I mean, that seems like it'd be an easy scenario.
Item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I got sent this picture by a few different people on social media, and I honestly can't tell if this is real or not. Now, the Twitter account who puts this out there is the Tennessee Vols trash can, and it was sort of, portrayed as Butch Jones washing the car here, and because it's a Mercedes, I assume this was like Nick Saban's Mercedes.
And
maybe Butch, the Tennessee intern, out there cleaning up the car for Saban. Is this a real picture?
I think it is a real picture. I don't think it's Nick's car. This is a Tennessee license plate, right?
I can't tell.
Tennessee's got the state of Tennessee as like the dash and the license plate.
Right, yeah.
So it looks like maybe somebody in the comment section knows better than me, but I got to tell you, because I thought it was Nick Saban's car at first. If you're Butch Jones, you would have to quit at that point, right? Well, you'd have to quit at that point if Nick Saban made you go wash.
But if you've seen these two teams head to head over the last couple of years, that is a sort of a fitting new job for Butch Jones, washing Saban's car.
I'm not even sure Tennessee fans will be mad at that.
I saw Saban at this Regions, Champions Tour golf tournament in Birmingham a couple of years ago. You know that Saban's got a guy who puts the ball on the tee for him at the driving range?
Was it Cedric?
I don't know who it is. But every time Saban hits a ball off the driving range tee, some guy puts it down there on the tee for him. That'll be Butch Jones this summer, too.
Cedric, for those Alabama fans that know Cedric, this guy has been around the program for like 40 years. He dates back to like Bear Bryant, did the same things for Bear Bryant. He is he does a lot for Nick.
Morgan Recton on YouTube says, BA wants that to be Saban's car so bad. I got to admit, I kind of did, just for the story of it.
I did too, because I looked at it first. And by the way, y'all know Nick Saban drives a car just like that. I mean, I thought it was Nick's car at first, too.
All right, speaking of cars and driving them, how about this for our champion of life? We're always looking to close the show the same way every day. And we can laugh about this because, amazingly, William Byron here walks out of this totally unharmed. It's an incredible feat of, engineering that this doesn't turn into some horrible injury. In Kansas over the weekend for the NASCAR race, of course, Mike's a big NASCAR fan. Byron involved in a terrible crash. Watch his car go up in flames here, and Byron survives to tell the tale here. Take a look at this.
Oh, trouble.
Hard, the wall goes
William Byron. Nose is in heavy.
Byron went in hard.
Matt Kent's has piled into Martin right about
The question I got to ask here, though, is for Liberty University, which ironically is the Flames. And that's their nickname. They're the Liberty Flames.
Right.
Liberty, is this good advertisement for Liberty or not?
It's great advertising. William Byron actually attends Liberty University. So
Does he really?
It works in both ways, and that's a scary track. Last year they had a guy, Eric Almirola, break his back at that track.
Now,
so.
why you got to take it to something serious like that? We're having a good time talking about a guy that...
Listen.
Well, we're having fun. I mean, we like the wrecks. We're having a fun time. You talking about somebody breaking their back.
I'm just excited we've got some on here, man.
Is this the kind of like somber tones you're going to bring to a Roll Tide Daily?
We never get to talk NASCAR. We're gonna talk a little bit on Roll Tide Daily, maybe.
By the way, to bring it back to football, Liberty actually moving up to FBS this year.
Yeah, they are moving up. One of my old teammates actually coaches up there and went there. So.
And when you're a true pro, you bring it back full circle just like that. Hey, check out the podcast. It'll be up right after the show. You can find it pretty much wherever you find podcasts. Just subscribe to us there, SEC Country Live. Also, share the video show with your friends on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every afternoon. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate you watching. And we'll look forward to seeing you again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day.